The door of the Hells Angels clubhouse slammed open. Every man inside reached for something, a pool cue, a bottle, a knife. But it wasn't a rival gang. It was a 12-year-old black boy. Bruises covered half his face. His sneakers were held together with duct tape. His hoodie was 2 sizes too big. He looked at 20 dangerous men and said 5 words that stopped every heartbeat in that room. "Can I work here?" He didn't ask for help, didn't ask for money, didn't ask for mercy. He asked for work. And that single question would expose a 12-year-old secret, destroy a monster, and prove that sometimes the most broken men make the best fathers. Before we begin, subscribe, stay until the end, and comment your city. Let's see how far this story travels. The door opened, and every conversation in the Hells Angels clubhouse died. Pool cues stopped mid-swing. Beer bottles froze halfway to lips. Someone killed the jukebox. And the silence that followed was the kind that made men reach for weapons they hoped they wouldn't need. Standing in the doorway was a kid. Black, skinny, maybe 12 years old, maybe younger. It was hard to tell with children who'd been underfed their whole lives. He was drowning in a gray hoodie 2 sizes too big, the kind of hoodie that wasn't fashion, but armor. His sneakers were held together with duct tape, wrapped so many times it was clear this wasn't his first repair job. But it was his face that made the room go cold. A bruise spread across his left cheekbone, purple in the center, fading to sick yellow at the edges. Fresh, maybe 2 days old. The kind of bruise that didn't come from falling off a bike or running into a door. The kind of bruise that came from a fist. "Wrong address, kid," a voice called from the back. Razor, a big man with a beard like steel wool, was already turning back to his card game. "This ain't no daycare." A few others laughed. Nervous laughter. The kind that fills uncomfortable silences. But the boy didn't leave. He stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him with a heavy thud that seemed to echo longer than it should have. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and his eyes, dark, steady, older than any child's eyes should be, scanned the room like he was calculating odds. "I said wrong address," Razor repeated, louder this time. The boy's voice cut through the smoke and testosterone like a blade. "I'm looking for work." The laughter stopped. "After school," the boy continued, his voice quiet but steady. "I can sweep floors, clean tools, organize parts, whatever needs doing. I'm a hard worker. I don't complain. And I don't steal." Razor slapped his knee and howled. "You hear this? Kid wants to join the crew. What's next? We gonna start recruiting from kindergarten?" More laughter, louder this time. The tension breaking into something that felt like relief. But one man wasn't laughing. Keller sat in the corner booth, half hidden in shadow, a mountain of muscle and scar tissue. His head was shaved clean, and a thick scar ran from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir from Fallujah that he never talked about. At 48, he'd seen more death than most people could imagine. He'd taught weapons handling to Marines. He'd pulled friends from burning Humvees. He'd buried brothers and held their widows while they screamed. And he'd learned something that most people never figure out: how to read the truth that people try to hide. What he saw in this boy's face wasn't desperation. It was something harder, something that made his chest tight. Determination, wrapped around shame, held together with the kind of quiet strength that only comes from surviving things that should have broken you. Keller stood up. The laughter died instantly. When the sergeant-at-arms moved, people paid attention. Keller had put 3 men in the hospital last year for disrespecting the club. He'd once broken a man's arm in 2 places for touching one of the waitresses without permission. When Keller moved, smart people got very still and very quiet. His boots were heavy on the concrete floor as he walked toward the boy. The kid's shoulders tensed. His hands balled into fists inside his pockets. But he didn't step back, didn't flinch, didn't drop his eyes. That told Keller more than any words could. "What's your name?" Keller's voice was gravel and whiskey, the voice of a man who'd smoked too much and screamed too loud in places where screaming was the only way to stay sane. "Marcus." "Marcus what?" "Thompson. Marcus Thompson." "You live around here, Marcus Thompson?" "Yes, sir. Oak Street, the yellow house with the chain-link fence." Keller's jaw tightened. He knew that house. Everyone in the club knew that house, even if they never talked about it. Foster home. Run by Clive Henderson and his wife Barbara, the place had a reputation. Nothing official, nothing proven, just whispers. Kids came and went. Some of them had bruises. None of them ever complained, and nobody ever asked questions. "How old are you?" 12. I'll be 13 in March." Keller took another step closer. Marcus's whole body went rigid, every muscle preparing for a blow that his brain had already decided was coming. But the blow didn't come. Instead, Keller crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. This close, he could see the bruise better, could see the way the swelling distorted the skin, could see the faint outline of knuckles in the purple. "That's a nasty bruise," Keller said. "I fell off my bike." "You ride your bike to school?" "Sometimes." "Where'd you fall? Street? Sidewalk? Gravel?" Marcus's eyes flickered, just for a second, just long enough for Keller to see the calculation happening behind them, the weighing of truth against consequence, the measuring of risk against reward. "Does it matter?" The question came out with an edge, thin and sharp, like a knife that had been sharpened too many times. "Yeah," Keller said quietly. "It does." The silence stretched between them. The other bikers had stopped pretending not to listen. Even Razor had set down his beer. The jukebox stayed silent. The only sound was the distant rumble of a truck passing on the highway outside. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. Keller made a decision. "Tell you what," he said, standing up slowly. "I need to check the garage, see what kind of work we've actually got. You wait here. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just sit." He pointed to a battered couch near the window. The leather was cracked, the stuffing was leaking out like old wounds, and the springs were poking through in at least 3 places. It was the ugliest piece of furniture in the clubhouse. It was also the safest seat in the building, visible from every angle, close to the exit, positioned where no one could sneak up behind you. Keller had chosen it deliberately. Marcus walked to the couch and sat down. His hands stayed in his pockets. His eyes stayed on the floor. His body stayed coiled and ready. Keller didn't go to the garage. He went to the back office, closed the door, and pulled out his phone. 2 hours passed. The clubhouse carried on around Marcus like he was furniture. Men came and went, loud and laughing, their boots heavy on the concrete floor. Card games started and ended. Arguments flared and faded. Someone turned the jukebox back on, filling the air with classic rock that vibrated through the walls. Marcus didn't move. He sat exactly where Keller had left him, hands in pockets, eyes down, breathing slow and controlled. He'd learned a long time ago that stillness was safety, that being invisible was better than being seen, that the less space you took up, the less likely someone was to notice you. And when people noticed you, bad things happened. Around noon, Tina emerged from the kitchen. She was 53 years old, with silver streaks in her dark hair and hands that had been cooking for hungry bikers for 15 years. She'd seen a lot of lost souls walk through that door. She'd fed most of them. She set a plate on the armrest next to Marcus, a sandwich, ham and cheese on white bread, and a cold Coke. She didn't say anything, didn't make eye contact, just set the food down and walked away. Marcus stared at the plate for 10 minutes. His stomach was screaming. He'd eaten exactly one meal in the last 2 days, a handful of stale cereal that Barbara had thrown at him yesterday morning, telling him he was lucky to get even that. But he didn't reach for the food, because in Marcus's world, food wasn't free. Food came with strings. Food came with expectations. Food came with debts that got collected in ways that made you wish you'd stayed hungry. 10 minutes turned to 15. 15 turned to 20. Finally, when no one was watching, Marcus reached out and took the sandwich. He ate slowly, carefully, making each bite last as long as possible. He didn't know when he'd eat again. When Keller finally returned, Marcus was exactly where he'd left him. The plate was empty, the Coke was gone, and the boy was sitting with his hands back in his pockets, eyes back on the floor, waiting. Always waiting. Keller crouched down in front of him. "All right, Marcus, here's the deal." Marcus looked up. His eyes were guarded, expecting disappointment. "We've got work. Sweeping, organizing, cleaning tools, like you said. $10 an hour, 3 days a week after school. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. 2 hours each day." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked almost like hope, quickly smothered. "You show up on time," Keller continued. "You work hard, you don't steal, and you don't lie to me. Ever. About anything. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Good. We start Tuesday, 4 o'clock. Don't be late." Marcus stood up, his movements careful and controlled. He nodded once, a small, tight motion that seemed to contain more gratitude than words could express. He walked toward the door. His hand was on the handle when Keller spoke again. "Marcus?" The boy turned. That bruise didn't come from a bike. It wasn't a question. Marcus's face went blank. That careful mask sliding back into place, the one he'd spent years perfecting, the one that kept the world out and kept his secrets in. "Tuesday," Keller repeated. 4 o'clock. The door closed behind him. The clubhouse seemed to exhale. "What the hell was that about?" Razor asked, walking over with a fresh beer. "Since when do we run a youth program?" Keller walked to the window and watched the small figure disappear down the street. The oversized hoodie, the duct-taped sneakers, the shoulders hunched against a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "That," Keller said quietly, "was a kid asking for a lifeline." He turned to face Razor. His eyes were hard. "And we're damn well going to throw him one." Marcus showed up Tuesday at 3:47, 13 minutes early. Same hoodie, same duct-taped sneakers. He stood outside the clubhouse door for a full 60 seconds before knocking, his hand raised and frozen, like he was giving himself one last chance to run. Keller opened the door before the second knock. "Punctual. Good." He led Marcus through the main room, quieter now in the afternoon light, past the pool tables and the bar, past the framed photographs of fallen brothers and the tattered American flag on the wall, out back to the garage. The space was massive, big enough for 6 bikes and a truck, with tools hanging on pegboards along every wall. The organization was military, everything in its place, everything labeled, everything clean despite the grease and oil that was part of daily life here. "This is lucky." The man Keller nodded toward was wiry and weathered, somewhere in his late 40s, with forearms covered in faded tattoos and grease permanently embedded under his fingernails. He was bent over a Harley engine, hands moving with the confidence of someone who'd rebuilt 1,000 motors. Lucky straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag that might have been white once, back when Reagan was president. He studied Marcus with sharp eyes that had seen too much hardship and not nearly enough kindness. "Kid's going to help with cleanup and organization," Keller said. "Show him what needs doing." Lucky grunted. "Broom's in the corner. Start there. When you're done, I'll show you how we sort parts." Keller left. Marcus got to work. He swept like his life depended on it. Methodical, thorough, getting into corners that hadn't seen a broom in months, maybe years. He didn't cut corners, didn't complain, didn't stop to rest. Lucky pretended not to watch, but he noticed. The kid worked harder than half the grown men who'd passed through this garage. He worked with the kind of desperate intensity that spoke of something deeper than wanting to make a good impression. He worked like someone who knew that second chances didn't come twice. After an hour, Lucky called him over. "You know anything about engines?" "No, sir." "Stop calling me sir. Makes me feel old." Lucky pulled out a cardboard box filled with bolts, washers, and various metal pieces. "These are engine components. They got mixed up when Razor knocked over 3 boxes last week, stumbling around like a damn elephant. I need them sorted. Bolts with bolts, washers with washers, by size. Think you can handle that?" Marcus nodded and sat cross-legged on the concrete floor. He dumped the box out in front of him and started working. Lucky went back to the Harley. But he kept one eye on the kid. What he saw surprised him. Marcus didn't just sort. He organized. He created rows. He lined things up by size with the kind of precision that spoke of a mind that craved order in a world that had given him nothing but chaos. After 20 minutes, Lucky walked over. The parts were arranged better than Lucky could have done himself. "You're good with your hands," Lucky said. Something in his voice had softened without him meaning it to. Marcus looked up. For half a second, just half a second, his guard dropped. And Lucky saw the kid underneath the armor. The kid who was desperate to be seen, desperate to matter, desperate to be good at something. "My dad used to fix cars," Marcus said quietly. Before what?" The guard slammed back up. The mask returned. Before he left. Lucky had been around long enough to know when not to push. Some stories came out in their own time, if they came out at all. And some stories were too heavy to force into the light before they were ready. "Well," Lucky said, keeping his voice casual, "if you want, I can teach you some basics, how engines work, how to take them apart and put them back together. Might be useful someday." Marcus's eyes lit up, actually lit up, like someone had flipped a switch inside him, illuminating a room that had been dark for years. "Really?" "Yeah, but only if you keep showing up, and only if you keep working hard." "I will." Marcus's voice was fierce. "I promise." The door to the garage banged open, and Moose Joe walked in. He was a bear of a man in his 60s, with a white beard that reached his chest and a leather vest covered in patches that told stories of decades on the road. He'd been the club's vice president until his son died 8 years ago. Overdose. Though the real killer had been a foster system that bounced the kid through 7 homes in 4 years, until he stopped believing that anyone would catch him when he fell. Joe had been watching from the clubhouse. He'd heard about Marcus. Heard enough to make old wounds ache in ways he'd thought had finally healed. "Killer tells me you walk home down Oak Street," Joe said, without preamble. Marcus scrambled to his feet, shoulders tensing. "Yes, sir?" "I'm headed that way. I'll walk with you." "You don't have to." "Didn't ask if I had to." Joe's voice was gentle but firm. The voice of a man who'd stopped asking permission a long time ago. "Grab your stuff." They walked in silence for 2 blocks. Joe's boots were heavy on the pavement. Marcus's footsteps were almost silent, the duct tape muffling any sound. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalks and overgrown lawns of this part of town. "You like working at the garage?" Joe asked finally. "Yeah." For the first time, there was something approaching enthusiasm in Marcus's voice. "Lucky's teaching me about engines." "Lucky's good people. Rough around the edges, but solid underneath." Joe paused. "How's school?" "Fine." "You got friends there?" Marcus shrugged, which was answer enough. They turned onto Oak Street, and Joe felt the change immediately. Marcus's pace slowed. His shoulders curled inward. His head dropped. His hands disappeared into his pockets. He was making himself smaller, shrinking into himself with every step they took toward the yellow house. Joe had seen this before. He'd seen it in his son in those last few years, the way abused kids learned to minimize themselves, to take up less space, to become invisible, because invisible was safe and visible was dangerous. "That's your place?" Joe asked, though he already knew. "Yeah." Through the window, Joe could see movement. A large man pacing back and forth, agitated, a bottle in his hand. "Who's inside?" "Clive, my foster dad." "He home a lot?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "Sometimes." They were 3 houses away now. 2. Joe could see the chain-link fence, rusted and leaning. Could see the yellow paint peeling off the siding. Could see the broken step on the front porch that no one had bothered to fix. "Marcus." Joe stopped walking. Marcus stopped too, but didn't look up. "If things ever get bad, I mean really bad, you call this number." Joe pulled a card from his wallet. It had the garage's phone number handwritten on it, along with a second number that went straight to Joe's cell. "Day or night, someone will answer. Understand?" Marcus took the card slowly. He stared at it like it was something precious and strange, like a kid who'd never received a gift and didn't know what to do with one. "Why are you doing this?" The question was barely a whisper. Joe's throat tightened. He thought about his son, Michael, who died alone in a motel room with a needle in his arm and no one to hold his hand. Who'd spent his last years bouncing through a system that was supposed to protect him, but instead taught him that he wasn't worth protecting. He thought about all the times he should have done something, said something, been there when Michael needed him. He thought about second chances and how they never came for the dead. "Because you asked for work instead of a handout," Joe said finally. "That takes guts, and people with guts deserve people who've got their back." Marcus looked up then. Really looked for the first time. And Joe saw something in those dark eyes that nearly broke him. Hope. Fragile and terrified, like a flame that had been stomped out so many times it could barely remember how to burn. "Thank you," Marcus whispered. "See you Thursday, kid." Joe waited until Marcus was inside before walking away. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone and called Keller. "It's worse than we thought," Joe said when Keller answered. "That house feels wrong, and the kid's terrified of going inside." "I know." Keller's voice was heavy. "I've been making calls all afternoon. My contact at CPS is looking into the placement. We're going to document everything: times, dates, visible injuries. Build a case." "And if that's not fast enough?" Silence on the line. Then Keller's voice went cold and hard. "Then we handle it our way." 3 weeks in, and Marcus had become part of the garage's rhythm. He showed up early every day, stayed late when they let him, absorbed everything Lucky taught him like a sponge desperate for water. His hands had earned calluses from tools and work, and there was something different in his eyes now. Not quite hope, but maybe its distant cousin. Thursday evening, Marcus was elbow-deep in sorting carburetor parts when the clubhouse door slammed open hard enough to rattle the windows. Heavy footsteps echoed through the main room. Then a voice, loud, drunk, furious, that made Marcus's whole body go rigid. "Where is he? Where's the kid?" Clive Henderson filled the doorway between the clubhouse and the garage like a bad dream made flesh. 6'2", 220 pounds of beer gut and bad intentions. His nose was a roadmap of broken capillaries, and his eyes were red with rage and whiskey. "That's my foster kid," Clive snarled. "And he's coming home. Now." Lucky stepped in front of Marcus without thinking, the wrench still in his hand. "Can I help you?" "You can mind your own damn business." Clive's voice was thick with alcohol and something uglier underneath. "That boy's got responsibilities. He's coming with me." Behind Lucky, Marcus hadn't moved, couldn't move. His breathing had gone shallow and rapid, and his face had drained of color. Keller emerged from the office. He moved with the deliberate calm of someone who had faced down insurgents in Fallujah, who had seen the worst humanity had to offer, and learned that panic was the enemy of survival. "Mr. Henderson." Keller's voice was level and cold. "Marcus's shift ends at 6. It's 5:30. He'll be home when his time's done." "I don't give a rat's ass about his shift." Clive's hands were balled into fists, and his voice was getting louder. "I didn't give him permission to be here. He's got chores at home, and when I tell him to be somewhere, that's where he damn well better be." "Actually," Keller said, "his caseworker signed off on the work program. I've got the paperwork if you'd like to see it." A lie. There was no paperwork. There was no caseworker approval. There was only a club full of men who'd made a decision, and a sergeant-at-arms who'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing weren't the same thing. Clive hesitated. "This is—"
"You people think you can just take in strays? Fill his head with ideas?"
He was pointing now, his finger jabbing toward Marcus like a weapon. "He's got responsibilities. He's got a place where he belongs." "What kind of responsibilities?" Keller asked, taking one step forward. "Specifically." Clive's face flushed darker. "That's between me and the kid." "Is it?" Keller took another step. Behind him, Razor and two other bikers had materialized from the clubhouse, forming a wall of leather and muscle that blocked the only exit. "Because from where I stand," Keller continued, "Marcus shows up here with fresh bruises every few days. His caseworker hasn't visited in 3 months, and he flinches every time someone raises their voice." Another step. "So I'm real curious about these responsibilities." Clive's hands were still clenched, but even drunk and raging, he could count. 5 bikers stood between him and Marcus. 5 men who looked like they'd be happy to give him a lesson in consequences. "You don't know what you're talking about," Clive spat. "Kid's clumsy, falls down. And maybe if he wasn't such a screw-up, I wouldn't have to—" He caught himself. His jaw snapped shut. But it was too late. "Wouldn't have to what?" Keller's voice could have cut glass. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Clive pointed at Marcus, his finger trembling with rage. "You! Home! 1 hour! Don't make me come back!" He turned and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to make the whole building shudder. The garage stayed silent. Marcus was staring at his hands. They were shaking so badly he couldn't hold them still. Lucky crouched down beside him. Hey, look at me." Marcus looked up. His eyes were wet, but the tears wouldn't fall. He'd learned a long time ago that crying made things worse. "You're okay," Lucky said. "He's gone. You're safe here." "I should go." Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "If I'm not home when," he said. "Not yet." Keller already had his phone out. "Joe, get over here. Now." 20 minutes later, Moose Joe walked Marcus home for the third time that week. But this time was different. This time, Barker followed on his bike, circling the block slowly, engine rumbling like a warning. This time, Razor's truck was parked across the street, engine off but windows down. This time, Marcus wasn't walking alone. When they reached the yellow house, Clive was visible through the front window, pacing, drinking, waiting. "You don't have to go in," Joe said quietly. "I do." "Marcus, if I don't, he'll call the caseworker, say I ran away." Marcus's voice was flat, emotionless, reciting facts he'd learned through painful experience. "Then I go to a group home, and group homes are worse." "How do you know that?" "Because I've been in 3 of them." Joe's heart stopped. "This is my 4th placement," Marcus continued. "After this, they stop trying to find you a real home. You just cycle through the system until you age out, and then you're on your own." Something cracked inside Joe's chest. He thought about Michael, about all the homes his son had cycled through, about all the times the system had failed him, had taught him that he wasn't worth saving. "Kid, it's fine." Marcus managed a weak smile that was somehow worse than tears. "I'm used to it." He looked at Joe then, really looked. "Thanks for the job. It's been good." He turned and walked toward the house. Joe had to physically stop himself from grabbing the boy and putting him on the back of his bike, had to remind himself that kidnapping didn't help anyone, no matter how pure the intentions. But God, he wanted to. Marcus reached the front door, opened it, stepped inside. The door closed behind him, and Joe stood on the sidewalk, fists clenched, heart breaking, watching through the window as Clive Henderson grabbed Marcus by the collar and shoved him toward the kitchen. Joe's phone was in his hand before he knew he'd pulled it out. "Keller, we're out of time. That bastard's going to hurt him. Bad. And soon." "I know." Keller's voice was heavy. "Meet me at Tina's diner. We need to talk about the file I found." "What file?" Silence. Then, "The one that explains why no one ever looked for Marcus's mother." Tina's diner sat on the edge of town, like a secret everyone knew but nobody talked about. Joe pushed through the door at 9:47 p.m., his boots heavy, his heart heavier. Keller was already there, sitting in the back booth with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched and a cardboard box on the table in front of him. "Sit down," Keller said, "and don't say anything until I'm finished." Joe slid into the booth. He'd known Keller for 18 years. He'd seen the man break bones without blinking. He'd seen him hold a dying brother's hand and weep like a child. But he'd never seen Keller look like this. Scared. Keller was scared. "I made some calls today," Keller began. "Called in favors I'd been saving for years. Got access to records I shouldn't have access to. And I found something that's going to make you sick." He pushed the cardboard box across the table. "Open it." Joe lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of papers, some yellowed with age, some fresh from a printer. On top was a photograph. A Polaroid, faded and worn at the edges. A young black woman smiled at the camera. She was maybe 20, 21 at most, with eyes that Joe recognized instantly. Marcus's eyes. Her name was Denise Thompson, Keller said. She worked here, at this diner, 20 years ago. Joe turned the Polaroid over. On the back, in looping handwriting that had faded but not disappeared. Marcus, 4 months. My whole world. Tina found this in her old employee records, Keller continued. Denise worked here for about a year, got pregnant, had a baby boy, kept working for 6 months after he was born, and then one day, she disappeared. She vanished, never came back, never picked up her last paycheck, never contacted anyone she knew. Keller's voice was hard, and nobody looked for her. Nobody asked questions. Nobody cared. Joe stared at the photograph, at the woman who could have been Marcus's twin, 20 years older, at the smile that held so much hope for a future she would never see. What happened to her? I don't know. Not yet. But I know who was the last person to see her. Keller pulled a sheet of paper from the box. It was a police report dated 20 years ago. Missing person: Denise Thompson, age 21. Last known location: Oak Street. Look at the address. Joe looked. His blood went cold. That's the Henderson house. That's Clive Henderson's house. Keller's jaw was tight. And here's where it gets worse. 6 months after Denise disappeared, Clive filed paperwork to become a foster parent. His first placement? An infant boy, approximately 10 months old, abandoned at a gas station. Marcus. Marcus. Keller nodded. Clive claimed he found the baby, said he was a good Samaritan. The social worker called him a hero. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked why an abandoned baby happened to be the exact same age as Denise Thompson's missing son. Joe's hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table to steady them. Are you telling me? I'm telling you that Clive Henderson has been collecting foster checks from Marcus for 12 years. I'm telling you that he's moved from county to county, always staying just under the radar, always with glowing reports that fade into nothing. And I'm telling you that Marcus's mother didn't abandon him at a gas station. Keller leaned forward. His eyes were burning. Someone made her disappear. And I'd bet everything I own that Clive Henderson knows exactly what happened. The diner was silent. Even Tina had stopped pretending to wipe down the counter. She stood, frozen, dish rag in hand, listening. We need to call the police, Joe said. With what? A 20-year-old missing person case that was closed in 48 hours? A gut feeling? Keller shook his head. The cops aren't going to touch this, not without evidence, not without proof. Then what do? We build a case. We document everything, every bruise, every mark, every time that kid flinches when someone raises their voice. We get statements from teachers, from neighbors, from anyone who's seen anything, and we find out what happened to Denise Thompson. And if that takes too long? Keller's face hardened into something cold and dangerous. Then we handle it ourselves. The next morning, Joe was parked outside Oak Street Elementary at 7:45 a.m. He watched Marcus walk to school alone. No backpack, no lunch bag. The same hoodie, the same duct-taped sneakers. The boy moved like a ghost, head down, shoulders hunched, taking up as little space as possible. Joe followed at a distance. He watched Marcus enter the building, watched him navigate the hallway with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to avoid attention. Watched him sit alone at a desk in the back of his classroom, invisible to everyone around him. At lunch, Joe walked into the school office. I'm here about Marcus Thompson, he told the secretary. I'm his uncle. Emergency contact. It was a lie, but it got him through the door. The principal was a tired woman in her 50s named Dr. Patricia Webb. She looked at Joe with the weary suspicion of someone who'd dealt with too many difficult relatives. What can I do for you, Mr. Mancini? Joe Mancini. Mr. Mancini, is there a problem with Marcus? I'm concerned about him. Joe kept his voice calm, neutral. He's been showing up with bruises, fresh ones, multiple times. Dr. Webb's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Children that age often have accidents. Playing sports, roughhousing. Does Marcus play sports? No. Does Marcus have friends to roughhouse with? Silence. Dr. Webb. Joe leaned forward. I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here because that boy needs help. And I think you know it. The principal was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. Off the record? Off the record. I've filed 3 reports with Child Protective Services in the last 2 years. 3 reports about Marcus Thompson. About bruises that don't match his explanations. About a child who comes to school hungry. About a boy who flinches when adults get too close. And nothing. Bitterness crept into her voice. Each time someone comes out to the house, each time Clive Henderson charms them. Each time the case gets closed. No evidence of abuse. Child appears healthy and well-adjusted. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Well-adjusted. That boy hasn't smiled once in the 3 years he's been at this school. Not once. But apparently that's not evidence of anything. Joe's chest tightened. Would you be willing to write a statement? Document what you've seen? Dr. Webb hesitated. Joe could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The risk, the potential consequences, the weight of professional responsibility versus the terror of doing nothing. If it would help Marcus, she said finally, I'd write 100 statements. By Thursday, Keller had assembled a file 3 inches thick. Dr. Webb's statement was in there. So were observations from 2 teachers who'd noticed Marcus's bruises, a report from the school nurse about an untreated sprained wrist that Marcus had tried to hide, photos Joe had taken over the past weeks. Documentation of every visible injury, dated and catalogued. And in the middle of it all, the mystery of Denise Thompson. I found something else, Keller told the club that night. They were gathered in the back room, away from prying eyes. Joe, Lucky, Razor, Barker, Tina. The inner circle. Denise Thompson had a neighbor, Keller continued. Old woman named Gladys Monroe. She's 83 now, lives in a nursing home in Riverside. But 20 years ago, she lived next door to the Henderson house. Did you talk to her? I did. Keller's voice was heavy. She remembers Denise. Remembers her as a sweet girl, devoted mother. And she remembers the night Denise disappeared. The room went still. What did she say? She said she heard screaming, late at night, coming from the Henderson house. She looked out her window and saw Clive dragging something heavy to his truck, something wrapped in a tarp. Joe felt sick. She didn't call the police? She was scared. Clive had a reputation even then, and back in those days, people minded their own business. Keller shook his head. She's regretted it ever since. Said it's haunted her for 20 years. Is she willing to testify? She's willing, but she's 83, and her memory isn't what it used to be. A defense lawyer would tear her apart. So we need more. We need a body. Keller's voice was flat. Or we need Clive to confess, neither of which is likely to happen. Razor slammed his fist on the table. So what? We just wait? While that animal keeps hurting Marcus? While he gets away with murder? We don't wait. Keller's eyes were cold. We push. We apply pressure. And we make sure that when this bastard falls, he falls hard. Friday evening, Marcus showed up at the garage at 3:52. He moved differently today, slower, favoring his left side. When he raised his arm to grab a wrench, Joe saw him wince. Marcus. The boy turned. Yeah? Come here. Marcus walked over, and Joe saw it. The fresh bruise on his neck, finger-shaped. The kind of mark that came from someone grabbing hard enough to leave prints. What happened? Nothing. Marcus. I said nothing, the boy's voice cracked. Just leave it alone, please. Joe crouched down to eye level. I can't leave it alone. You know I can't. Marcus's eyes were wet, but the tears wouldn't fall. He'd learned too well that crying made things worse. If you report it, they'll move me, and the next place will be worse. It's always worse. How do you know? Because that's how it works. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. The system doesn't save kids like me. It just moves us around until we age out or give up. I've seen it happen. To kids younger than me. Kids who thought someone was going to help them. Marcus, nobody helps. The boy's voice broke. Nobody ever helps. So just let me do my job and go home and survive until I'm 18. That's all I'm asking. Just let me survive. Joe's heart shattered. He thought about Michael, his son, who'd said almost the exact same words almost a decade ago, who'd begged Joe to stop trying to fix things, to just let him survive. Michael hadn't survived. I can't do that, Joe said quietly. I won't watch you drown and do nothing. Not again. Again? Joe was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out an old photograph, worn at the edges, creased from years of being carried. A young man smiled at the camera, 18 years old, dark hair, kind eyes, a smile that looked like hope. My son, Joe said. Michael. He was in the foster system too. 7 homes in 4 years. I didn't know. By the time I found out, it was too late. Marcus stared at the photograph. What happened to him? He died 8 years ago. Overdose. Joe's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. He'd stopped believing anyone would catch him when he fell, and one night, he fell too far. The garage was silent. I couldn't save him, Joe continued. I've spent 8 years living with that. 8 years wondering what would have happened if I'd done something sooner, if I'd pushed harder, if I'd refused to accept that the system would handle it. He looked at Marcus. I'm not going to make that mistake again. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm going to get you out of that house. And I'm going to make sure Clive Henderson never hurts another child. Marcus was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. Why? He whispered. Why do you care? You don't even know me. Because you walked into that clubhouse asking for work instead of charity. Because you show up every day and give everything you've got. Because you're 12 years old and you've already survived more than most people face in a lifetime. Joe put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. And because every kid deserves someone who gives a damn. That night, Keller called an emergency meeting. Melina from CPS fast-tracked the case, he announced. She saw the file we built, the photographs, the statements, the connection to Denise Thompson. She's recommending immediate removal. When? Joe asked. Monday. There's an emergency hearing scheduled for Monday morning. Judge is going to review the evidence and decide whether to remove Marcus from Clive's custody. Does Clive know? Not yet, and we need to keep it that way. If he gets wind of this, he might run. Or worse. Razor cracked his knuckles. I can make sure he doesn't run. No. Keller's voice was sharp. We do this by the book. We've got one chance to nail this bastard legally. If we screw it up, if we give him any excuse to claim harassment or intimidation, he walks, and Marcus goes right back into his hands. So what do we do until Monday? We watch, we wait, and we make sure nothing happens to that kid before the hearing." But something did happen. Saturday morning, Marcus didn't show up for his shift. He'd never missed a day. Not once. Not even when he was limping so badly he could barely walk. Not even when his face was so bruised he could hardly see out of his left eye. Joe called the garage. No answer. He drove to Oak Street. The yellow house was quiet. Too quiet. The curtains were drawn. No movement inside. Clive's truck was in the driveway, but that didn't mean anything. Joe parked across the street and waited. An hour passed. 2. At 11:47 a.m., the front door opened. Marcus emerged. Alone. Moving slowly, carefully, like every step hurt. He was wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the warm weather, and he walked with the kind of deliberate precision that spoke of hidden injuries. Joe got out of his truck. "Marcus!" The boy froze. Then he turned, and Joe saw his face. Both eyes were black. His lip was split and swollen. A cut on his forehead had been poorly bandaged, blood seeping through the gauze. Jesus Christ. Marcus started walking faster, away from Joe, away from the house. Just away. Joe caught up to him in 3 strides. "Marcus, stop. Let me see." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Look at me." Marcus stopped. His shoulders were shaking. "He found out," Marcus whispered. "About the hearing. Someone called him, told him CPS was coming Monday." Joe's blood went cold. "Who called him?" "I don't know, but he was drunk and screaming about how I ruined everything, about how they were going to take me away and it was all my fault." "Marcus, we need to get you to a hospital." "No!" The boy grabbed Joe's arm with surprising strength. "No hospital. No police. If we do anything now, before the hearing, he'll say I'm lying. He'll charm them like he always does, and they'll believe him." "Marcus." "Monday." Marcus's eyes were fierce, despite the bruises. "We wait until Monday. We do this right. We make sure he never hurts anyone again." Joe looked at this 12-year-old boy, this child who'd been beaten and broken and abandoned by every system that was supposed to protect him. This kid who'd survived things that would have destroyed grown men. And he saw something he recognized, the same determination he'd seen in Marines before a firefight, the same steel he'd seen in men who knew they might not survive, but refused to back down. Marcus wasn't just surviving anymore. He was fighting. "Okay," Joe said quietly. "Monday. But you're not going back to that house. Not tonight. Not ever again." "Where else am I going to go?" Joe put his arm around the boy's shoulders, gently, carefully, mindful of the injuries he couldn't see. "Home," he said. "You're coming home." The clubhouse had never been this quiet on a Saturday night. Joe led Marcus through the front door, his arm still wrapped protectively around the boy's shoulders. Every man in the room turned to look. Every conversation died mid-sentence. And when they saw Marcus's face, when they saw the black eyes and the split lip and the blood seeping through the bandage on his forehead, something changed in the air. Something dangerous. Razor stood up so fast his chair crashed to the floor behind him. "Who did this?" "You know who," Joe said quietly. "Then why the hell are we standing here? Let's go, right now. I'll break every bone in that son of a—" "No." Keller's voice cut through the room like a blade. He'd emerged from the back office, and his face was carved from stone. "Nobody touches Henderson. Not tonight. Not before the hearing. Look at him, Keller!" Razor's voice cracked. "Look at what that animal did to a 12-year-old kid!" "I see it." Keller walked toward Marcus slowly, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "I see everything." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't look away. He met Keller's gaze with eyes that were too old for his face.
Monday, Marcus said. We finish this Monday.
Keller stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Monday. He stood up and turned to face the room. Here's what's going to happen. Marcus stays here tonight. Tomorrow night too. He doesn't go back to that house. Not ever. Razor, you and Barker take shifts outside. If Henderson shows up looking for him, you call me. You don't engage. You don't threaten. You just call. And if he tries to get in? Keller's jaw tightened. Then you do what you have to do to protect that kid. But nothing more. Understood? Razor nodded, though his hands were still balled into fists. Lucky, get the first aid kit. Real supplies, not the garbage we keep behind the bar. Tina, the kid needs food, something hot, something real. Everyone moved at once. Lucky disappeared into the back room. Tina headed for the kitchen. Razor grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, Barker right behind him. Joe guided Marcus to the couch.
The same battered couch where he'd sat that first day, 3 weeks ago, when he'd walked through the door asking for work.
3 weeks. It felt like a lifetime. Let me look at you, Joe said quietly. Marcus sat still while Joe examined his injuries. The black eyes were bad, but not dangerous. The split lip would heal. The cut on his forehead might need stitches, but they could handle that here. But when Joe gently pushed up Marcus's sleeve, he stopped breathing. Bruises covered the boy's forearm, old ones fading yellow, new ones dark purple, almost black. And underneath the bruises, scars. Thin white lines that told a story of years, not weeks. How long? Joe's voice was barely a whisper. How long has this been going on? Marcus didn't answer. Marcus. How long? I don't remember a time when it wasn't. The boy's voice was flat, empty. It just is. It's always been. Lucky returned with the first aid kit. A real one, military grade, the kind Keller had brought back from his service days. He handed it to Joe without a word, then stood back, his face pale. Joe worked in silence, cleaning the wounds, applying antiseptic, bandaging what needed to be bandaged. Marcus didn't make a sound, didn't flinch when the antiseptic stung, didn't cry when Joe had to press hard to check for cracked ribs. He'd learned a long time ago that pain was just something to endure. Tina emerged from the kitchen with a plate of food. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread, the kind of meal that was meant to comfort, to heal, to say the things that words couldn't express. She set it on the table in front of Marcus. Eat, she said. All of it. Marcus stared at the plate. His eyes were wet. Why are you all doing this? Doing what? Tina asked. This. Marcus gestured weakly at the room, at the food, at the people who'd dropped everything to take care of him. I'm nobody. I'm just some kid who showed up asking for work. Why do you care? Tina sat down next to him. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. 20 years ago, she said, a young woman walked into my diner looking for a job. She was pregnant and scared and had nobody in the world to help her. But she was determined. She worked harder than anyone I'd ever hired, and when her baby was born, she brought him to work sometimes, tucked in a little basket behind the counter. Marcus went very still. She used to talk about that baby like he was the most precious thing in the world. Like he was her whole reason for living. Tina's voice cracked. Her name was Denise. And her baby's name was Marcus. The plate of food sat untouched. Marcus's hands were shaking. You knew my mother?
I knew her. Tina wiped her eyes. And I've been carrying the guilt of not looking for her hard enough for 20 years. But now you're here. And maybe I can't bring her back, but I can damn well make sure her son gets the life she wanted for him. Marcus broke. The tears he'd been holding back for 12 years finally came. Great, racking sobs that shook his whole body. Tina pulled him into her arms and held him while he cried, while all the pain and fear and loneliness of his short life poured out of him. Joe had to look away. He walked outside, needing air, needing space. Razor was already there, leaning against his bike, watching the street. "Kid okay?" "No." Joe's voice was rough. "But he will be." "What happens after Monday, if the judge takes him away from Henderson?" "He comes here. I'm filing for emergency guardianship." Razor turned to look at him. "You serious?" "Dead serious." "Joe, you don't know anything about raising a kid." "I know more than you think." Joe's jaw tightened. "I had a son once. I failed him. I won't fail this one." The night crept by slowly. Marcus fell asleep on the couch around midnight, exhausted from crying, from pain, from the simple act of being held by someone who cared. Keller covered him with a blanket and posted Lucky inside to keep watch. The rest of the club gathered in the back room. "We have a problem," Keller said. "Someone tipped Henderson off about the hearing. Someone told him CPS was coming Monday." "Who?" "I don't know, but that means he's had time to prepare, time to get his story straight, time to make Marcus look like a liar." Joe's hands clenched. "What do we do?" "We make sure the evidence speaks for itself. The photographs, the statements, the connection to Denise Thompson." Keller pulled out the file they'd built over the past weeks. "This is solid, but it's not enough to guarantee conviction. Henderson's beaten the system before. He knows how to play the game. So we need more. We need him to slip up, to say something, to do something that proves beyond any doubt what he really is." "How do we make that happen?" Keller was quiet for a long moment. "We don't. We let him do it himself." He looked at the men around him. Henderson's scared now. He knows the walls are closing in. Scared men make mistakes. And when he makes his, we need to be ready. At 6:47 a.m., the mistake came. Barker called from outside. His voice was tight. "We got company. Henderson's truck just turned onto the block." Everyone moved at once. Lucky woke Marcus and guided him to the back room. Razor grabbed a bat. Keller walked to the front door and opened it, stepping outside before Henderson could reach the entrance. Clive Henderson climbed out of his truck. He was drunk. His shirt was stained with sweat and alcohol, and his eyes were wild with something between rage and fear. "Where is he?" Clive's voice echoed down the empty street. "Where's my kid?" "He's not here." Keller's voice was calm, deadly calm. "Don't lie to me. I know he's in there." Clive took a step forward. "That boy is my responsibility. He belongs to me. You can't just take him." "Nobody took him. He left. On his own." "Bullshit!" Clive was screaming now. "You people have been filling his head with lies, turning him against me. I'm his father." "You're his foster parent." Keller didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "And from what I've seen, you're not even good at that." Clive's face twisted. "You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've put up with. 12 years I've taken care of that ungrateful little—" He stopped himself, but not fast enough. 12 years, Keller repeated slowly. "That's interesting. Because according to the records, you found Marcus abandoned at a gas station when he was 10 months old. But his mother disappeared when he was 4 months old."
Clive's face went pale. What are you talking about? Denise Thompson, young black woman, worked at the diner on 5th Street. Had a baby boy named Marcus. Keller took a step forward. Disappeared 20 years ago. Last seen on Oak Street. I don't know what your street, Henderson. She was last seen on your street. And 6 months later, you magically found her baby abandoned at a gas station. That's a coincidence. Is it? Keller's voice was ice. Because I talked to your old neighbor, Gladys Monroe. She remembers the night Denise disappeared, remembers hearing screaming from your house, remembers seeing you drag something heavy to your truck. Clive's face went from pale to gray. That old bitch doesn't know what she saw. She's senile. She's willing to testify. Keller smiled, but there was no warmth in it. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get in your truck. You're going to drive away. And tomorrow morning, you're going to show up at that courtroom and face what's coming. Because if you run, if you try to hurt that boy again, if you do anything other than exactly what I just said, I will personally make sure that you spend the rest of your miserable life regretting it. Clive stood frozen. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Get in your truck, Keller said quietly. Now. For a moment it looked like Clive might argue, might fight, might do something stupid. Then his shoulders slumped. He turned, walked back to his truck, and climbed in. The engine roared to life, and then he was gone, taillights disappearing around the corner. Keller watched until the truck was out of sight. Then he pulled out his phone and called Melina. We have a problem. Henderson just showed up at the clubhouse. He's scared, and he's drunk, and he knows we're on to him about Denise Thompson. He listened for a moment. Yeah, I think he might run. Or do something worse. Another pause. Can you move the hearing up? Get an emergency order tonight? The answer made him close his eyes. Okay, first thing Monday. But I'm telling you, we need eyes on this guy. If he disappears, we lose everything. He hung up and turned to find Joe standing in the doorway. What did she say? She's going to try to get a warrant for Henderson's arrest based on the connection to Denise Thompson. But it's Sunday. Judges don't like working Sundays. So we wait. Keller's jaw tightened. And we pray that bastard doesn't do something stupid before Monday morning. The rest of Sunday passed in a blur of tension and waiting. Marcus stayed in the back room, surrounded by people who'd become something like family in the span of 3 weeks. Lucky taught him how to clean a carburetor. Tina brought him meals every few hours, whether he was hungry or not. Razor sat outside, watching the street, waiting for a threat that never came. But the threat was coming. They all felt it. Like a storm building on the horizon, too far away to see but close enough to smell. At 9 p.m., Keller gathered everyone together. Henderson didn't run. Melina's got someone watching his house. He's still there, still drinking. That's good, right? Lucky asked. Maybe. Or maybe he's planning something. Keller looked at Marcus. Tomorrow morning, the judge is going to review the evidence. She's going to listen to testimony from you, from me, from Dr. Webb, from anyone else who's seen what Henderson's done. And then she's going to decide. Decide what? Whether to remove you from his custody, whether to grant me emergency guardianship, whether to investigate what happened to your mother. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What if she decides wrong? She won't. But what if she does? What if Henderson convinces her I'm lying? He's done it before. He's always done it before. Joe crouched down in front of him. This time is different. How? Because this time you're not alone. Joe put his hand on Marcus's shoulder.
This time, you've got people who aren't going to stop fighting until you're safe, no matter what the judge decides, no matter what Henderson tries. You're not alone anymore, and you never will be again. Marcus looked at him, really looked, like he was searching for something in Joe's face. You promise? Joe's throat tightened. He thought about Michael, about promises he'd made and broken, about the second chance he didn't deserve, but was being given anyway. I promise. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay. He stood up and looked around the room, at Keller standing guard by the door, at Lucky cleaning a wrench that didn't need cleaning, at Tina wiping her eyes in the kitchen doorway, at Razor, whose hands were still balled into fists. I want to testify, Marcus said. Keller raised an eyebrow. You're sure? I'm sure. I want to tell them everything, every bruise, every scar, every time I begged him to stop, and he didn't. Marcus's voice was steady, fierce. And I want to ask about my mother. I want to know what happened to her. I want him to look at me and know that I know, that everybody knows. The room was silent. Then Keller smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his scarred face. All right, kid. Tomorrow, you tell your truth, and we'll be right there with you. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on the cot they'd set up for him in the back room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the clubhouse settling around him. The creak of old wood, the distant rumble of a motorcycle, the quiet murmur of voices from the main room where someone was always awake, always watching. Around 2 a.m., Joe appeared in the doorway. Can't sleep? Marcus shook his head. Joe walked over and sat on the edge of the cot. What's on your mind? Everything. Marcus stared at his hands. What happens after tomorrow? Even if the judge takes me away from Clive, what happens next? Where do I go? You come here, with me. For how long? For as long as you want. Joe's voice was steady. I'm filing for guardianship. If the court approves it, you'll be my responsibility, legally. But more than that, you'll be family. Real family. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I've never had that before. Real family. Neither have I, not for a long time. Joe thought about Michael, about the wife who'd left after the funeral, about the empty years that followed. But maybe that's okay. Maybe two people who've never had family can figure it out together. Marcus looked up at him. You really want me? Even knowing everything about me? About where I come from? I want you because of everything about you. Because you're brave and smart and stronger than anyone I've ever met. Because you walked into that clubhouse asking for work when most kids your age would have given up. Because you remind me of what matters. What matters? Second chances. Joe's voice cracked. Being there when it counts. Not making the same mistakes twice. Marcus reached out and grabbed Joe's hand. It was a small gesture, a child's gesture. But it carried the weight of everything they'd been through, everything they still had to face. Tomorrow, Marcus said quietly, we finish this. Tomorrow, Joe agreed. We finish this. Outside, the first light of Monday morning was beginning to creep across the sky. And somewhere across town, Clive Henderson was loading a gun. The courthouse parking lot was full by 8:30 a.m. Joe pulled his truck into a spot near the back, Marcus beside him in the passenger seat. The boy was wearing clothes Lucky had bought the night before, a clean white shirt, khaki pants, shoes without duct tape for the first time in years. He looked different, older somehow, like the weight he'd been carrying had settled into something solid.
"You ready?" Joe asked. Marcus stared at the courthouse doors. "No." "Good. Neither am I." They got out of the truck. Keller was already waiting by the entrance along with Razor, Lucky, and Barker. Tina stood off to the side, clutching a folder of documents to her chest. Dr. Webb had arrived separately and was talking with Melina on the courthouse steps. It looked like an army. It felt like one, too. "Henderson's lawyer is already inside," Keller said as they approached. "Some guy from the city, expensive suit, slicked back hair. The kind of lawyer who makes money getting guilty people off." "What about Henderson?" "Not here yet, but he'll show. He has to." They walked into the courthouse together. Marcus stayed close to Joe, his shoulder brushing against the older man's arm with every step. It was the only sign of fear he showed. The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had expected. A judge's bench at the front, 2 tables facing it, a few rows of seats for observers. Everything wood and leather and old. Judge Catherine Hayes was already seated. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen too many broken children pass through her courtroom. She watched Marcus enter with an expression that was impossible to read. "All parties present?" she asked. "The respondent isn't here yet, Your Honor," the expensive lawyer said. He stood at the left table, straightening papers he'd already straightened twice. "Mr. Henderson called this morning. He's running a few minutes late." "Then we'll wait." Judge Hayes's voice was ice. "But not long." They took their seats. Marcus sat between Joe and Keller at the right table. Melina sat behind them. The observers' seats filled with faces Marcus recognized. Tina, Lucky, Razor, Dr. Webb. People who'd become his family without him noticing. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. The expensive lawyer checked his watch for the 4th time. His face was getting paler. "Your Honor, perhaps we should—" The courtroom doors burst open. Clive Henderson stumbled in. He was wearing a suit that didn't fit right, a tie that was crooked, and an expression that wavered between rage and terror. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands were shaking, and when he walked, he weaved slightly. He was still drunk. "Mr. Henderson," Judge Hayes's voice could have frozen fire. "You're late." "I apologize, Your Honor. Traffic." "Sit down." Clive dropped into the chair beside his lawyer, who leaned over and hissed something in his ear. Clive waved him off, his eyes fixed on Marcus across the room. Marcus didn't look away. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the custody of Marcus Thompson, currently placed in the foster care of Clive Henderson," Judge Hayes began. "Child Protective Services has filed a petition for immediate removal based on allegations of abuse and neglect. Mr. Henderson, you have the right to contest these allegations. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Ms. Melina, please present your evidence." Melina stood. She was calm, professional, her voice steady as she walked the judge through 3 weeks of documentation. Photographs of bruises, medical records, statements from teachers, the testimony of Dr. Webb, who described a pattern of injuries that couldn't be explained by childhood accidents. With each piece of evidence, Clive's face got darker. His lawyer tried to object, twice, 3 times. Judge Hayes overruled him each time. "And now, Your Honor," Melina said, "I'd like to address a related matter. The disappearance of Denise Thompson 20 years ago." The courtroom went still. "Denise Thompson was Marcus's biological mother," Melina continued. "She disappeared when Marcus was 4 months old. 6 months later, Mr. Henderson claims to have found Marcus abandoned at a gas station and filed for foster placement." "Objection!" The expensive lawyer was on his feet. "This is completely irrelevant to the custody hearing." It's relevant, Your Honor, because it establishes a pattern of deception, and because we have a witness who places Denise Thompson at Mr. Henderson's residence the night she disappeared. Judge Hayes leaned forward. Continue. Gladys Monroe, Mr. Henderson's neighbor at the time, has provided a sworn statement. She reports hearing screaming from the Henderson residence on the night Denise Thompson was last seen. She also reports seeing Mr. Henderson loading something heavy into his truck in the early hours of the morning. That's hearsay! The lawyer was almost shouting now. That woman is 83 years old. Her memory is perfectly clear, according to the neurologist who examined her last week. Melina's voice didn't waver. She's willing to testify under oath. Clive was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. This is ridiculous, he muttered. This is a witch hunt. Mr. Henderson, Judge Hayes's voice was sharp. You will remain silent unless asked to speak. But, Your Honor, silent, or I will hold you in contempt. Clive's jaw snapped shut. Is there anything else, Ms. Molina? Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call Marcus Thompson to testify. Joe felt Marcus tense beside him. He reached under the table and squeezed the boy's hand once. You've got this, he whispered. Just tell the truth. Marcus stood up. His legs were shaking, but his face was set. He walked to the witness stand, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. The whole truth. Nothing but the truth. Marcus? Molina began gently. Can you describe your living conditions at the Henderson residence? Marcus's voice started quiet, hesitant, but as he spoke it grew stronger. He told them about the beatings. The first one he could remember when he was 6 years old. The time Clive broke his arm and told the doctor he'd fallen off the porch. The nights spent locked in his room without food. The mornings he'd gone to school with bruises he'd learned to hide. He told them about the fear, the constant, grinding terror of never knowing what would set Clive off. The way he'd learned to move silently, to take up as little space as possible, to become invisible, because invisible was safe. He told them about asking for help, the teachers who'd noticed and reported and been ignored, the caseworkers who'd visited and been charmed, the system that was supposed to protect him, but instead taught him that he wasn't worth protecting. And then he told them about walking into the Hells Angels clubhouse. Why did you go there? Molina asked. Marcus looked at Joe, at Keller, at the men who'd become his family. Because I was out of options, he said. I couldn't take it anymore. I thought maybe if I could get a job, save some money, I could run away when I turned 18. I didn't know they'd actually help me. I didn't know anyone would help me. And did they help you? They saved my life. Marcus's voice cracked. They're the only ones who ever saw me, the only ones who ever asked if I was okay and actually wanted to know the answer. The courtroom was silent. Judge Hayes was looking at Marcus with something that might have been tears in her eyes. I don't have any further questions, Your Honor, Molina said softly. The expensive lawyer stood up. His face was pale, and Joe could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This was unwinnable. He knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. But he tried anyway. Marcus, isn't it true that you have a history of behavioral problems at school? No. Your records show. My records show that I'm quiet and I keep to myself, because that's what you learn to do when you're getting beaten at home. The lawyer flinched. Isn't it possible that some of these injuries were self-inflicted? That you... I didn't hit myself. Marcus's voice was steady, cold. He did. Every time. For 12 years. Mr. Henderson has provided a loving home for... He locked me in my room without food. He broke my arm. He gave me these. Marcus pulled up his sleeve, showing the scars on his forearm. Does that look like love to you? The lawyer had nothing to say. No further questions. he muttered, sitting down. Judge Hayes turned to Clive. Mr. Henderson, do you wish to testify on your own behalf? Clive looked at his lawyer. The lawyer shook his head slightly, but Clive was too far gone to listen. Yes, Your Honor, I do. He walked to the witness stand. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated. When he sat down, he gripped the armrests like he was trying to hold himself together. Mr. Henderson, Judge Hayes said, you understand you're under oath? Yes. Then tell me, did you abuse Marcus Thompson? No. Clive's voice was too loud. I disciplined him. There's a difference. The boy was difficult, always causing problems. Somebody had to teach him discipline. Judge Hayes's voice was razor sharp. You called breaking a child's arm discipline? That was an accident. And the bruises? The scars? The nights without food? He's exaggerating. Kids make things up. They want attention. And Denise Thompson. Did she make things up too? Clive froze. What? Denise Thompson, Marcus's mother. The woman who disappeared from your street 20 years ago. I don't know anything about that. Then how did you find her son 6 months later? I told you, he was abandoned at a gas station. Which gas station? It was a long time ago. I don't remember exactly. You don't remember where you found an abandoned baby? It was 20 years ago. But you remember it was a gas station. Yes. And you remember he was alone. Yes. And you just happened to find the son of a woman who disappeared from your own street? Clive's face was white now. His hands were shaking violently. That's a coincidence. Is it? Because your neighbor saw you that night. Saw you dragging something heavy to your truck. Heard screaming from your house. She's lying. She's willing to testify under oath. Are you willing to explain what she saw? Clive's mouth opened, closed, opened again, and then he broke. I didn't mean to! The words exploded out of him. She was going to take the boy. She was going to leave. I just wanted to stop her. I didn't mean for her to... He caught himself, but it was too late. The courtroom erupted. The expensive lawyer was on his feet, shouting objections. Melina was already on her phone, calling for police backup. Judge Hayes was banging her gavel, demanding order. And Marcus sat frozen, staring at the man who'd beaten him for 12 years. The man who'd just confessed to killing his mother. Joe was beside him in an instant. Marcus, look at me. The boy's eyes were wide, shocked, empty. He killed her, Marcus whispered. He killed my mom. I know. I'm so sorry. She didn't abandon me. She didn't leave me at a gas station. He took her. He killed her. Joe pulled Marcus into his arms. I know, son. I know. 2 police officers burst into the courtroom. Judge Hayes pointed at Clive. Arrest that man, now! Clive tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Razor appeared in his path, solid as a wall. Going somewhere? The officers grabbed Clive's arms. He was screaming now, incoherent, fighting against the cuffs they were putting on his wrists. This is a setup! They planned this! I want my lawyer! I want... The courtroom doors closed behind him. The screaming faded. Silence. Judge Hayes took a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. This hearing is concluded. Marcus Thompson is hereby removed from the custody of Clive Henderson, permanently and irrevocably. Mr. Joseph Mancini's petition for emergency guardianship is approved, pending standard background checks and home evaluation. She looked at Marcus, still wrapped in Joe's arms.
Son, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what you've been through. I'm sorry the system failed you for so long. But I want you to know something.
Marcus looked up.
You're not alone anymore. And what happened in this courtroom today? That took more courage than most adults have in their entire lives. Your mother would be proud of you.
Marcus couldn't speak. He could only hold on to Joe and cry. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters by the time they emerged. Someone had leaked. Word had spread. A 12-year-old abuse victim. A foster father who'd confessed to murder. A biker gang who'd saved a child. It was the kind of story that wrote itself. Keller handled the press. Short, clipped answers. No details. The boy has been through enough. Leave him alone. Joe guided Marcus through the crowd, shielding him from cameras and microphones. The rest of the club formed a protective barrier around them, leather-clad angels who'd never looked less dangerous. They made it to Joe's truck. Marcus climbed into the passenger seat and stared straight ahead, his face blank.
Where are we going?
He asked. Home, Joe said. We're going home.
Where's home?
Joe started the engine. The clubhouse, for now. But we'll figure it out. Together. Marcus nodded slowly.
Okay.
They drove in silence for a while. The adrenaline was fading, leaving something hollow in its place. Marcus watched the streets pass by, the familiar landmarks of a town that had never protected him, that had let him suffer in plain sight for 12 years.
Joe?
Yeah?
What happens now? To Clive?
He goes to prison. For a long time. Maybe forever.
And my mom?
Joe's hands tightened on the steering wheel. They'll investigate. They'll search his property. They'll find out what happened to her.
Will they find her?
Joe didn't answer for a long moment. I hope so, son. I hope they can bring her home. Marcus turned to look out the window again.
She tried to take me away,
he said quietly.
That's what he said. She was going to take me and leave. And he killed her for it.
She loved you more than anything.
I know. Tina told me.
Marcus's voice cracked.
She used to bring me to work in a little basket. She used to talk about me like I was the most precious thing in the world.
Tears were streaming down his face again. Silent tears. The kind that came from a grief too deep for sound.
She never abandoned me,
Marcus whispered.
All these years, I thought she left me. I thought I wasn't worth keeping. But she didn't leave. She tried to save me. And he killed her for it.
Joe pulled the truck over to the side of the road. He turned off the engine. And he held Marcus while the boy cried for the mother he'd never known. The mother who'd loved him enough to die for him. The mother whose truth had finally come to light. They sat there for a long time. The sun climbed higher in the sky. The world went on around them. But in that moment, nothing else existed except a broken man and the broken boy, holding each other together. I've got you, Joe said. I've got you, son. And for the first time in his life, Marcus believed it. Back at the clubhouse, the celebration was already underway. Tina had cooked enough food for an army. Razor had broken out the good whiskey. Even Keller was smiling, a rare sight that made the younger members of the club do double takes. But when Joe and Marcus walked through the door, everything stopped. Everyone turned to look at the boy who'd walked into this place 3 weeks ago, beaten and desperate, and asking for work. The boy who'd testified against his abuser in open court. The boy who'd just learned the truth about his mother's death and was still standing. Keller raised his glass. To Marcus, he said. "The bravest damn kid I've ever met." "To Marcus!" the room echoed. Marcus stood frozen for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. Something that might have been the beginning of peace. "Thank you," he said quietly. "All of you. For everything." "You earned it, kid." Razor clapped him on the shoulder. "Every bit of it." That night, for the first time in 12 years, Marcus Thompson slept without fear. And across town, police excavators began digging in Clive Henderson's backyard. 3 days after the hearing, Detective Sarah Chen called Joe at 6:47 a.m. "We found her." Joe's hand tightened on the phone. He was standing in the hallway outside Marcus's room, watching the boy sleep peacefully for the first time in his life. "Where?" "Henderson's backyard, under the old shed. He'd buried her in a shallow grave, wrapped in a tarp." Detective Chen's voice was steady, professional, but Joe could hear the anger underneath. "She's been there for 20 years. Right there, while that bastard collected checks for raising her son." Joe closed his eyes. "Does Marcus know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. Give you time to prepare him." "Thank you." "There's something else." Detective Chen paused. "We found something with her. A letter. It was in a plastic bag, protected from the elements. It's addressed to Marcus." Joe's heart stopped. "A letter?" "She must have written it before Henderson stopped her. It's still legible, mostly." "Can we have it? For Marcus?" "It's evidence right now, but after the trial, yes. I'll make sure he gets it." Joe hung up and stood in the hallway for a long time, trying to find the words, trying to figure out how to tell a 12-year-old boy that his mother had been found in a monster's backyard after 20 years. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Something happened," he said. It wasn't a question. Joe looked at him, at this boy who'd survived things that would have destroyed grown men, at this child who'd walked into a biker clubhouse asking for work and ended up tearing down an entire web of lies and murder. "They found her," Joe said quietly. "They found your mom." Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. His face was completely still, like someone had pressed pause on everything inside him. "Where?" "Henderson's backyard." "She was there the whole time?" "Yes." Marcus walked past Joe into the main room of the clubhouse. It was early and most of the club was still asleep, but Lucky was in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up when Marcus entered. "Kid, you okay?" Marcus didn't answer. He walked to the window and stood there, staring out at the street where the sun was just starting to rise. Joe followed, keeping his distance. "There's something else," Joe said. "She left a letter. For you." "The police found it with her." Marcus's shoulders tensed. "What does it say?" "I don't know. They can't give it to us until after the trial. But it exists. She wrote to you before." Before Henderson killed her. Neither of them said it out loud. "She wrote to me," Marcus whispered. 20 years ago. She wrote to me." "She loved you, Marcus. She loved you enough to try to run, to try to save you. And she loved you enough to leave you something. A piece of herself." Marcus turned around. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. Not yet. "I want to see her." Joe's throat tightened. "Marcus, I want to see where they found her. I need to." He couldn't finish the sentence. Joe walked over and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Okay, we'll go. Together." The yellow house on Oak Street looked different in the morning light. Police tape surrounded the property, Excavators had torn up the backyard, leaving raw wounds in the earth. Officers moved back and forth, documenting, photographing, searching for anything else Clive might have hidden. Joe parked across the street. Marcus sat beside him, staring at the house where he'd been beaten for 12 years. The house where his mother had been buried for 20. "I grew up here," Marcus said quietly. "I slept in a room 30 feet from where he put her." Joe didn't know what to say. There was nothing to say. "He used to make me do yard work, mowing the lawn, pulling weeds. I stood on top of her. I walked on top of her. And I never knew." "You couldn't have known." "He knew." Marcus's voice was ice. "Every time he hurt me, every time he told me I was worthless, every time he said my mother abandoned me, he knew she was right there. He knew she'd tried to save me. And he used that to torture me." Detective Chen approached the truck. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and the kind of face that had seen too much death to be surprised by anything anymore. "Mr. Mancini." "Marcus." Marcus looked at her. "Can I see?" Detective Chen hesitated. "It's not pretty back there. The excavation, I don't care. She's my mother. I want to see." Chen looked at Joe. Joe nodded slowly. "Okay," Chen said. "Come with me." They walked around the house, past the crime scene tape, into the backyard. Marcus moved like he was walking through a dream, his feet carrying him forward even though every step felt impossible. The old shed had been torn down. In its place was a pit, maybe 4 feet deep, surrounded by markers and flags. "We found her here," Chen said quietly. "She was wrapped in a blue tarp. The same tarp the witness saw Henderson loading into his truck 20 years ago." Marcus stood at the edge of the pit. He stared down at the empty space where his mother had spent 2 decades, and then he fell to his knees. Joe was beside him in an instant, holding him, catching him before he collapsed completely. "I'm sorry, Mama," Marcus whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. I'm sorry I couldn't save you." "She wouldn't want you to be sorry," Joe said. "She'd want you to live, to be happy, to have the life she dreamed of for you." "How do you know?" "Because that's what any mother would want. And from everything I've heard about Denise, she was the best kind of mother." Marcus looked up at the sky. "I'll make her proud," he said. "I promise. I'll make her proud." The funeral was small. Just the club, Tina, Dr. Webb, and a few others who'd been touched by the story. They buried Denise Thompson in a cemetery overlooking the town, under a headstone that read, "Beloved Mother, taken too soon, never forgotten." Marcus stood at the grave, holding a single white rose. "I don't remember her," he said quietly. "I was 4 months old when she died. I don't remember her face, her voice, the way she held me." Joe stood beside him. "But you carry her with you, in your eyes, in your strength, in the way you refused to give up, even when everything was against you." "You think so?" "I know so. Tina says you have her eyes, her determination, her heart." Marcus placed the rose on the grave. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. "It's me, Marcus. I'm okay now. I'm safe. And I have a family. They're not perfect, but they chose me, just like you chose me." He wiped his eyes. "I'm going to read your letter when they give it to me, and I'm going to keep it forever, and I'm going to make you proud. I promise." He stood there for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to Joe. "Let's go home." 6 weeks later, the guardianship was finalized. Joe stood in a courtroom that felt different from the last one. Brighter, warmer. Judge Hayes was there again, but this time she was smiling. "Mr. Mancini, you understand the responsibilities you're undertaking?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you, Marcus, you understand that this is permanent, that Mr.
Mancini will be your legal guardian until you turn 18? Marcus looked at Joe, at the man who'd walked him home, who'd fought for him, who'd held him while he cried and promised never to let go. "I understand, Your Honor." "Then by the power vested in me by the state, I hereby grant Joseph Mancini full legal guardianship of Marcus Thompson." She banged her gavel. "Congratulations. You're a family now." The courtroom erupted. Razor whooped so loud the bailiff nearly tackled him. Tina was crying. Lucky was pretending not to cry. Keller just smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his scarred face. Joe pulled Marcus into a hug. "Welcome home, son." Marcus held on tight. "Thank you for everything." "You don't have to thank me. Your family. Family doesn't need thanks." They walked out of the courthouse together. No reporters this time, no cameras. Just a man and a boy, and a group of bikers who'd become something more. That night, the clubhouse threw the biggest party in its history. Music blasted. Food covered every surface. Men who'd spent their lives on the wrong side of the law celebrated the one thing they'd done right. Marcus moved through the crowd, accepting handshakes and hair ruffles and awkward hugs from men who looked like they'd never hugged anyone in their lives. He found himself standing by the window, looking out at the street where his old life had ended and his new one had begun. Keller appeared beside him. "How you doing, kid?" "Good," Marcus smiled. "Really good." "You know, when you walked through that door 3 weeks ago, I thought you were crazy. A 12-year-old asking for work at a biker clubhouse? Dumbest thing I'd ever seen. And now? Now I think it was the bravest thing I'd ever seen." Keller put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You changed us, kid. All of us. You reminded us what it means to give a damn about something bigger than ourselves. You saved my life. You saved ours." Keller's voice was rough. "Don't forget that." Later, Joe found Marcus in the garage. The boy was sitting on the floor, surrounded by engine parts, his hands covered in grease. Lucky's toolbox was open beside him, the one with Marcus labeled on the side. "Couldn't sleep?" Joe asked. "Too much noise," Marcus smiled. "Too much happiness. I'm not used to it." Joe sat down beside him. "You'll get used to it." "Yeah?" "Yeah, it takes time. But one day you'll wake up and realize that happy is your normal, that safe is your normal, that loved is your normal." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Joe?" "Yeah?" "The letter from my mom. Detective Chen called today. She said I can have it next week, after they finish processing it as evidence." Joe's heart swelled. "That's good news." "I'm scared to read it." "Why?" "Because what if—" Marcus struggled to find the words. "What if it changes things? What if she wrote something that makes me feel different? About her, about myself, about everything?" Joe thought about it carefully. "When I lost Michael," he said slowly, "I spent years wishing he'd left me something. A letter, a note, anything. Just to hear his voice one more time, to know what he was thinking at the end." "Did he?" "No, he didn't." Joe's voice cracked. "And that silence has haunted me every day since. So whatever your mother wrote,
whatever she wanted you to know. It's a gift, the most precious gift she could give you. Don't be scared of it. Be grateful for it." Marcus nodded slowly. "Will you be there when I read it?" "If you want me to be." "I want you to be." Joe smiled. "Then I'll be there." 1 week later, Detective Chen delivered the letter. It arrived in a clear plastic evidence bag, yellowed with age but still legible. The envelope was simple, white, with Marcus written on the front in careful handwriting. Marcus held it like it was made of glass. Joe sat beside him on the couch in the clubhouse. The room was empty. They'd asked for privacy. The rest of the club was in the garage, pretending to work on bikes while really just waiting. "Whenever you're ready," Joe said. Marcus opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. He unfolded it carefully, his hands trembling. And he began to read. "My dearest Marcus, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I'm writing this because I need you to know the truth, even if I'm not there to tell you myself. You are loved. You have always been loved. From the moment I knew you were coming, you were the center of my universe. Everything I've done, everything I'm about to do, is for you. I'm leaving tonight. I'm taking you and running as far as I can. There's a man here who scares me, who's been watching us, who wants to control us. I can't let him have you. I won't let him have you." If this letter reaches you, it means I failed. It means something stopped me. But I need you to know that I tried. I tried with everything I had. Don't ever believe that I abandoned you. Don't ever believe that you weren't wanted. You were wanted more than anything in this world. You were my reason for breathing. I don't know what will happen to you if I'm gone. The world isn't kind to children without families. But I believe in you. I believe that you're strong enough to survive anything. I believe that someday someone will see you the way I see you, as the most precious gift this world has ever given. Find people who love you. Hold on to them. Let them in even when it's scary. Don't let the world make you hard. Don't let the pain make you bitter. You deserve happiness. You deserve safety. You deserve everything. I love you, Marcus. I have loved you from your first breath. I will love you until my last. And if there's any way to watch over you from wherever I am, I will. Every day, every moment, I'll be there. Be brave, my son. Be kind. Be strong. And know that your mama loved you more than words could ever say. Forever yours, Denise." Marcus finished reading. The letter trembled in his hands, and then he broke. Great, heaving sobs tore through him, all the pain of 12 years, all the loneliness, all the wondering why he wasn't worth keeping. All of it came pouring out in a flood of tears and grief, and something that felt almost like relief. She hadn't abandoned him. She'd loved him. She'd died trying to save him. Joe pulled him close, holding him tight, letting him cry. The letter was still clutched in Marcus's hands, pressed against his chest like a lifeline. "She loved me," Marcus choked out. "She really loved me." "I know, son. I know." All this time I thought." "I know." They sat there for a long time. The sun moved across the sky. The clubhouse stayed quiet. Finally, Marcus pulled back. His face was red and swollen, but there was something different in his eyes. Peace. "I'm going to frame this," he said, looking at the letter. "I'm going to put it somewhere I can see it every day, so I never forget." "That's a good idea." "And I'm going to make her proud. I'm going to go to school, get good grades, maybe go to college.
be something. You're already something, Marcus. No. The boy shook his head. I'm going to be more. For her. For you. For everyone who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Joe smiled. Then let's get started. 1 year later, Marcus stood in the garage, putting the finishing touches on an engine he'd rebuilt from scratch. It had taken him 6 months. Lucky had taught him every step, but the final assembly, the last bolts, the moment of truth, that was all Marcus. He stepped back and looked at his work. Ready? Lucky asked. Marcus nodded. Lucky turned the key. The engine roared to life. Perfect. Smooth. Beautiful. The garage erupted in cheers. Razor, Barker, Keller, Tina, and Joe standing in the doorway, beaming with pride. Marcus looked at the men who'd become his family, at the woman who'd known his mother, at the father he'd chosen for himself. He thought about the boy who'd walked through that door a year ago, beaten, bruised, asking for work because he'd run out of hope. That boy was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone who'd learned that family wasn't blood. It was the people who showed up when everything fell apart. Joe walked over and put his arm around Marcus's shoulders. Proud of you, son. Marcus leaned into the embrace. Thanks, Dad. It was the first time he'd called Joe that. Joe's eyes filled with tears. You're welcome, he managed. You're so welcome. That night, Marcus visited his mother's grave. He knelt in front of the headstone, the letter from his pocket pressed against his heart. Hey, Mom. It's me.
I came to tell you something. He paused, gathering his words.
I'm okay. I'm really okay. I have a family now. They're loud and rough and they curse too much. But they love me. And I love them. He traced his fingers over her name. I read your letter. Every night before I go to sleep. It reminds me who I am. Where I come from. What you sacrificed for me. Tears fell, but he didn't wipe them away. I'm going to make you proud. I promise. I'm going to live the life you dreamed of for me. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be brave. He stood up. I love you, Mom. I always will. And I know you're watching. I can feel it. He looked up at the stars. Thank you for loving me enough to fight for me. Thank you for writing that letter. Thank you for being my mother, even if it was only for 4 months. He touched the headstone one last time. I'll see you again someday. But not yet. I've got a life to live first. He walked back to Joe's truck, where the rest of the club was waiting. Keller, Lucky, Razor, Barker, Tina, and Joe. His father. His family. Marcus climbed into the passenger seat. Joe started the engine. Where to? Joe asked. Marcus smiled. Home. And as the truck pulled away from the cemetery, as the stars wheeled overhead and the road stretched out before them, Marcus Thompson finally understood something he'd spent his whole life searching for. He wasn't the boy with the bruised face anymore. He wasn't the foster kid nobody wanted. He wasn't the son of a mother who abandoned him. He was Marcus Thompson. Survivor. Fighter. Son. And he was finally, truly, completely home. Because sometimes the family you're born into fails you. But the family you choose, the broken, beautiful, imperfect people who see you when no one else does, that family can save your life. All you have to do is be brave enough to walk through the door.